So I'm so excited that today on the Zing Wellbeing podcast, we're here with Dr Kristy Goodwin, who is a Neuro Performance Scientist.
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
It is a mouthful, but I'm so excited you're here because it's such an important topic we're going to talk about today. Well, we're going to talk about a couple of things, but we're going to talk about the health, wellbeing, gender gap, which I think is, a really important topic, and then we're going to talk about stress. But first, talk to me about your story. What led you here and why are you so passionate about this subject?
So I wish I had a really fancy career trajectory mapped out, but the reality is it was a series of serendipitous life events that really led me to where I am today. The chief one being at the height of the pandemic, like many people, I contracted COVID. As a fit, vaccinated woman in her early 40s, I actually thought it would be a relatively minor health incident. If I'm honest, I had plans of binge watching Netflix in bed and my husband delivering me chicken soup, neither of which happened.
Good old husband.
What I didn't expect was that I would get really sick with COVID. I had uncontrollable seizures, and one Wednesday morning at about 3 a.m, our dog Tommy found me beside our bed having yet another seizure and alerted my husband. I was rushed to a code red emergency ward and hooked up to a ventilator, unable to breathe. Doctors were at a loss to explain why. Why was someone with no underlying or known underlying health issues so sick with COVID? And after extensive testing, neurological and cardiac testing, the only medical explanation that they came up with was that I was burnt out. Wow. For years, that chronic stress that so many of us wrestle with and ignore caught up with me. And I often say our body keeps score. The body doesn't lie. And so for years I'd adopted, I don't know if you remember the Codral advice of the 1980s, and I just soldier on. And I did what many people do. I'd ignored the whispers from my body to slow down, to work in a more sustainable pace, and I pushed on. I was working, as many of us do, I often say, in a frantic, frenetic and frazzled way. And so for years I'd been living with this chronic stress. Now, it came to a head in COVID. My husband had conveniently been deemed an essential worker. I was not only trying to resurrect a speaking career, I was simultaneously tasked with the impossible job of homeschooling 3 young boys.
So I feel your pain.
You can remember the stress.
I had two young boys homeschooling, and I remember it being extremely painful and stressful. So 3, hats off to you.
Yes, and so some days I was trying to do remote learning and then deliver a keynote on the other side of the kitchen table. So incredible stress. And so I'd ignored those whispers, and my body certainly let me know I was experiencing stress. And one of the problems with stress is that many of us experience in very different ways. There's not sort of a universal checklist of criteria for what constitutes stress. But I knew I was stressed, but I'd ignored it. I kept pushing and pushing and pushing until my body had no other option other than to shut down. As I lay there in that code red emergency ward, I could hear through the paper petition curtain the woman next to me gasping for air, calling out for her daughters. I heard the doctors and nurses not so discreetly saying, I don't think her daughters will get here on time. It was at that moment in time where I was forced to face my own possible mortality. Was I going to face the same thing? Would I go home to my sons, my husband, our dog? Had I almost paid what I call the ultimate success tax? And I think many of us are paying the success tax. We often achieve, incredible levels of performance. At an optics perspective, we're achieving great things, accolades, career success, but we're often paying a tax. Is it our mental health? Is it our physical well-being, our relationships, or the trifecta, all 3? And I realised that I had been living and working in a way that was completely incompatible with what I call our human operating system, our HOS, how we are designed as humans. And as I lay there in that bed, I actually heard the woman next to me take the final breath of her life.
Oh my gosh.
It was a moment I will never, emotional thinking about it, I'll never forget. And I lay there and I pledged to myself that if I did make a recovery, I would start living and working in ways that were compatible with my human operating system. I would start living and working in ways that were sustainable. And since that moment in time where I was lucky enough to walk out of that code red ward, I totally transformed how I was living with life. I transformed, I often call it how we dance with stress. I think an inevitable reality in our modern lives is that we've got to learn to deal with stress. We've got to learn to dance with it. And so I've totally changed how I live so that I can achieve the success that I want, but I will never, ever pay that success tax again. And so that was the catalyst for me to do it. That then became, I guess, the impetus for me to share that with other people. How can we get other people living the life that we're meant? I don't know if you've ever read the book 4,000 Weeks.
I haven't.
Oh, such a good book.
I'll put it on my list.
Put it on your list. On the Kindle, it is a brilliant book, and it's around this premise that as humans, if we are lucky, we have around 80 years in our lifespan, give or take. That equates to around 4,000 weeks. When I speak to audiences, I tell them that means if you are one of the lucky ones, you will have 4,000 Saturdays in your lifetime.
Yeah, wow.
Are you spending those 4,000 Saturdays as a high-res, powered-up version of yourself? Or are you, as the majority of people are, I think if they were really honest, living as a low-res, powered-down version of themselves? Yeah. And so that's, I guess, my mission, to help people power up their performance, but to do so in a way that is compatible with this human operating system, which is where all the neuroscience and neurobiology fits in.
Amazing. I mean, I think it's fascinating, and I resonate with your story so much because I've had so much stress in my life, especially over the past 10, 12 years. And I remember I think it was probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I got shingles.
Yes.
And I was like, what? Like, how can I be possibly having shingles? And I was really concerned, and it was stress, right? I was under so much stress. And I remember after that seeing so many different specialists to try and understand how I could manage the stress better, because I had obviously been so stressed that I'd got shingles. And I remember one of the things that I remember from that time was that they were saying you can't test for it, because they what they can test for is Addison's disease, which is what happens afterwards, after it's too late. But you can't test for stress or high cortisol, or kind of, when you're under that kind of, stress state, which is leading your body to shut down. They wait till the body shuts down. And I thought, God, isn't that just crazy? Like, in this modern world, that we're not thinking about stress. And for me, that was, obviously it wasn't anywhere as severe as yours, but it was very much a line in the sand for me. And then when a couple of years ago, I sold the business and I was going to stay on, and the stress came back in like huge amounts. And that's when I sat down with my husband and my kids, and I said, life is for living, right? It's a choice whether I put myself through this stress and a lot of stuff that was getting directed towards me with the new people. And I said, you know what, I'm going to walk away from it, even though I'm walking away from money, and no one thought I would ever walk away from it, because I'd spent 12 years of my life building it. But I decided, from my own experience and everything I'd been through, that I was going to choose my health and my family rather than being someone who was going to end up dead. And that's what I thought that's what would happen to me. So I totally understand what brought you to this situation, where you are today.
And can I also say, what you shared about shingles is very, very common. We know many people, again, our bodies all respond to stress in different ways, but that physical manifestation of many people developing some sort of autoimmune condition or some sort of adverse health illness is often directly attributed to unmanageable stress. And we see that time and time again. The other interesting thing I wanted to pick up on with what you were saying is that another issue that we are hearing a lot more about today is burnout. And I think it's a term that's often become part of our vernacular, and we throw the term around. We know that more people are experiencing burnout than ever. And burnout, in its simplest definition, is unresolved stress, often described as unresolved workplace stress. And the problem with burnout is that it is a slow burn. It's an erosive spiral. And again, I'm reverting back to the Pantene ads. It doesn't happen overnight.
The racial hunter ones.
Yes.
I remember.
But it will happen.
But it will happen.
And it does. But the problem often with burnout is that often our bodies are so depleted that we no longer even produce the cortisol to tell us that we're physiologically experiencing stress. And so for me, even though I research and speak about burnout, I had no idea I was burnt out until the doctors thought that that was their only plausible medical explanation as to why I was so sick. And so that's part of the problem. We've got to catch people in that stress spiral before we're in a really depleted state. And that's really challenging.
Oh, it is challenging, because I think one of the things that I've seen over many years is that people don't want to listen until they're sick. And, everyone's carrying on, life's busy. If there's not a problem today, they don't think about it. And what I really want to try and do with what we're doing at Zing Wellbeing, and I know you're in the same kind of belief, is that education all the time to women who are healthy so they don't become sick, because that's what it's hard work, right? But if you're sick, that's when it's really hard work.
Yeah, and it's really sad that it takes a serious health incident, it takes a life-changing moment in our lives for that, I guess, to be the catalyst for us to make a change. Yeah. Like you, my mission is to empower people, particularly women. Yeah. Let's be proactive. Yeah. Let's put in place some strategies so that we can live that high-res life that we're designed. Yeah. I think part of the problem and part of the conversation is that as a society, in many Western countries, we've almost normalised stress and exhaustion. It's almost a proxy for your productivity. If you're a high performer, then an inevitable reality is that you're stressed and exhausted. I want to question that. I don't think that's how we're designed to live. If we really, I think we've been duped into thinking that we've just got to survive. Yeah. That's not how we're designed to live. We are designed to thrive, not survive. And so I think it's part of the shifting of the conversation to say, what can we do to be our powered up best versions, that high-res version of ourselves that we are biologically designed to do. The reason I think that we're not is that we are living and working, and the two have become enmeshed together in recent years.
Absolutely.
But we are living and working in ways that are incompatible with our human operating system.
Agreed completely. Now, what I would love to ask you as well is that when we talk about males and females, right, everyone's under stress. Yep. But there is a difference, isn't there, between the way women process stress versus men. Is that a biological thing?
Absolutely. We know from studies that women are experiencing greater levels and prolonged periods of stress compared to our male counterparts. Aura conducted a study and males were experiencing an average of 83 minutes of stress a day, females in comparison around 109 minutes of stress a day, using a wearable device to track their stress. Deloitte published a study earlier this year saying that 50% of women say their stress is higher than what it was 12 months ago. Yeah. So we've got the anecdotal, we've got the research to tell us that women are far more stressed than men. And yes, there are distinct biological differences. We know, for example, that women don't produce as much. We certainly do produce testosterone, but not as much as males. Testosterone, for want of a better word, is a buffer against stress. It helps us to respond physiologically to stress. We don't have that in the same quantity as our male counterparts. So we are more prone to experiencing longer periods of stress and at a heightened intensity. We know from a hormonal perspective that women's estrogen levels fluctuate. That fluctuation in estrogen often, again, determines how we respond to stress. We still know, even in 2024, that women tend to still absorb the bulk of caring and domestic responsibilities in most heterosexual relationships. And so that comes with, incredible demands and challenges. We also now know that domestic and caring responsibility now comes with an increasing digital load. It's the email of the bill that's going to be, debited from your account and the annoying text message to tell you the exact same thing. It's the 48 WhatsApp groups that you're part of if you are a parent. If you've got aging parents, it's the email from the aged care provider. You're in the family group WhatsApp chat to determine what to buy grandma for her 90th birthday. So we see that digital load. There is also, again, in 2024, it is still prevalent, a perception that women are perhaps not as ambitious as their male counterparts in the workplace. So to compensate, a lot of women engage in what we call digital presenteeism. They feel obliged so that it looks like, from an optics perspective, that they are working. They reply to the emails at 11 o'clock at night. They're accepting the Teams meeting at 7:30 in the morning. So there's that increasing, again, digital load that comes that way.
Oh, it's awful. I mean, it's shocking. I know that over the past kind of decade, I've employed mostly women, and the majority of them have been mums. And I'm guilty of this too, so I'm exactly the same. But because everyone who's ever worked with me has always worked flexible hours because it's school pickup. Yeah. But what that does mean, and I am guilty, my husband will say I'm probably the worst person for this, is that I'm back on at 7 or 8 o'clock because I'm making up for the time that I've spent doing kid stuff, and it's the same for people who've worked with me. And you know, and I've always seen that as, oh, it's great, it's flexible. We're so lucky that we can work around. But it is putting on stress because people don't get that switch off.
Yeah. And we are living, I often say we are now living in ways where we are always on, we are rarely focused, we're never recovered.
Yeah.
Always on, rarely focused, never recovered. That's not how we're designed as humans.
Yeah.
And we know, I often go back to our brains and say we cannot outperform our biological blueprint. As humans, despite how incredibly talented we are, we have some harsh biological constraints that we have to live within. Yeah. And one of the things that I often share with people is the part of our brain that does our heavy lifting, the prefrontal cortex. It solves problems, it helps manage our impulses, it helps us hypothesize. I often say it's the CEO or the air traffic control system of the brain. Our prefrontal cortex only has a 4 to 6 hour battery life per day.
Wow.
Now, a lot of people hear that and they say, oh, I know companies are sometimes talking about the 4-day work week. Is Kristy suggesting we have a 4-hour work day? I'm not suggesting that. I get a lot of angry emails from people's HR departments. What I am suggesting, though, for us to do the mentally taxing, the challenging parts of our work, we really only have a 4 to 6 hour battery life per day. So if you are consistently pumping out 14, 16-hour days, you're working against your human operating system. Another thing we know, we are designed as humans to work and recover, effort and recover. And one of the biological constraints is that we have something called an ultradian rhythm. And our ultradian rhythm means that as humans, we can sit down and get through some work for roughly 90 minutes. We sort of have a peak performance window and it's a rough estimate, but around 90 minutes. Then we will inevitably hit a 20-minute trough. Now, again, you need to try to structure the contours of your day so you can effort for a period. Maybe it's 70 minutes, maybe it's 80 minutes. It's certainly not 6 hours where you just work, and then you go and have a break. So we are designed to sort of work and then recover, work and then recover. And there's some new research telling us that if we take proactive rest, and a lot of high performers find this hard, a lot of women see rest as frivolous. It's something that we do on our annual leave or we'll do on Sunday afternoon at 3:00 when everything else is done. But Gartner research tells us that if we proactively invest in rest, we boost our performance by around 26%. Right, so it's actually a performance enhancing strategy because we work with rather than against our human operating system. Yeah. But for many of us, it's a quantum leap in our thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting. And when you said about the operating system 4 to 6 hours, how long before that resets?
So that's where we need, I often talk about, to beat burnout, there's 3 types of breaks we need. Yeah. And I use a coffee analogy. I'm certainly not saying you need to drink caffeine, but use the analogy. So the first type of break, we need a piccolo break. So a little bit like a piccolo coffee. They're small, but they pack a mean punch. Yeah. 2 to 10-minute breaks interspersed throughout your days. You should have several of those. Really good micro habit to implement. The second type of break, we need a tall break. So sometimes the piccolo coffee won't hit the spot. We need that tall coffee. This is where we call it 1 to 2 hours per day where we psychologically detach, at least from our work. And then the grande, the day where the piccolo and the tall coffee just won't hit the sides. We need the big grande coffee. That is where we have at least a half to a full day off per week. Now, that's what we call the minimum effective dose. Ideally, we'd be doing more than that, but at a rudimentary level, they're the 3 types of breaks. Overwhelmingly, the research tells us that those 2 to 10-minute breaks interspersed throughout our days are by far the most effective at beating burnout and reducing our stress.
So question though, because I'm thinking back to your 4,000 Saturdays and I'm thinking how many of those 4,000 have I spent watching kids sport? So that's where my head goes. But if you're saying you need that day off a week, and I, again, speak for myself, and I'm sure a lot of women, Saturday and Sunday don't seem to be a break because there's so much stuff going on, and it's either it's kids, it's sport, it's domestic chores. There is no time. Like, I don't feel like I get a downtime. Like I'm like crying out for bedtime at 9:30 because that's my time. So what does that mean for us? Because if we're detaching from the work, which is, allegedly Monday to Friday, but, and then the weekend is stress as well, is that a different type of stress, or is it compounding? What is happening there?
I think it's compounding.
Yeah.
And this is why I think we're seeing this really pronounced gender wellbeing gap.
Yeah.
Again, if you tend to be the parent in the WhatsApp group, you're getting all the logistics, text messages about the fields have changed, we're going to this venue, we're training here. But I also want to remind people that those 2 to 10 minute breaks are really effective. Okay. Often I think we've got visions of, half a day in the day spa.
Oh, lovely.
Love that. And I'm not saying don't do that. If you've got the opportunity, take it with both hands. But I think we've often tricked ourselves into thinking that we need these really long periods of time. We certainly do need to have some breaks, but those 2 to 10 minutes are just as effective. We know, for example, closing our eyes for 30 seconds, especially given most of us are looking at screens for long periods each day. When we're looking at a screen, part of our brain, it's called the occipital lobe. It processes what we see. That occipital lobe fatigues really easily. So closing your eyes just for 30 seconds, and you can do it on your Teams or Zoom meeting, just sit still so it looks like your internet has frozen. Closing your eyes for 30 seconds.
Helps.
We know to bring us back to a stress baseline, and this is where technology is actually making us stressed in often very invisible and subtle ways. So as humans, we are biologically designed to sigh while we're awake for every 5 minutes. It's a natural mechanism to regulate our oxygen and carbon dioxide
like
levels.
A big sigh.
Yeah, not the obvious teenage hand on the hip eye roll, that sigh. But we do 2 inhalations through our nose.
Yeah.
And we exhale through our mouth. And we're often unaware that we're doing it. At least we should be doing it, and we used to be doing it. However, when our eyes converge on a small surface area like they do on our phones, our laptops or our desktops, we do not sigh anywhere near as much. And so when we do not sigh when we're looking at a screen, we're in that elevated stress state. Right. They have studied a condition called email apnea. So when we go into our inboxes, we literally hold our breath, we dump a whole lot of cortisol, our heart rate accelerates, we have a physiological response. And then we've all got that one colleague, client, you see the sender and you're like, oh
my God, isn't it awful? What are we doing to ourselves?
So our biology is significantly being shaped by technology in profound ways. But the good news is that if we are designed to sigh every 5 minutes, one of the most scientifically validated ways to bring us back to a stress baseline that you can do anywhere, anytime. That you can do it on the side of the football field if you're there, stuck in traffic when you're running late to school pickup. That's stressful. On that awkward Teams meeting. Yeah. Sighing 2 to 3 times will bring us back to a stress baseline.
Wow.
And so I think I want to challenge that assertion that we do, and we, where we can, we do need those tall breaks and those grande breaks. But don't forget that we often dismiss those little micro breaks as well. Those piccolo breaks can really have a profound impact.
Oh, I love it. I think that's fantastic because I watch a lot of sport with my kids and it's so stressful. That elevates my stress because it's awful. I'm like, this is such a bad thing for me to do. It makes me even more stressed. Unless they win and I'm like, I'm all good then. Yeah. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and I read a piece that you wrote, which I thought was so interesting. All of your stuff is so interesting, but I particularly like this, was that, we can't really stop the stresses around us because it's life, right? And as life's become busy, and if we're juggling so many things, it's difficult not to kind of have that stress. But what we can do is, yes, there's the traditional things that I think a lot of us know about, which is the breathing and the meditation and things like that. But what I found fascinating was the physical ways we can reduce stress, and where you wrote about some evidence which showed a part of the brain which controls the will in obese people. That is a small part of the brain, whereas in the elite athletes, it's the large part of the brain because they do things that are hard physically, which then prepares the body to handle stress better.
Yes.
I think that's incredible.
So I often say, and stress gets a really bad rap. Yeah. Let's be honest, we've often been told we should avoid stress, it's detrimental. Yes, chronic stress is, but we are biologically designed as humans to cope with stress. I think we've forgotten that. Yeah. We are designed, however, for short bursts of stress, and we are designed to close out or resolve the stress cycle. So in years gone by, a tiger chased us, we would have run into a cave, short burst of stress, we complete the stress cycle. But in our always on, digitally demanding worlds that we've now all inherited, we are always often in this elevated stress state. We very rarely have short bursts of stress, and so that chronic stress is really detrimental. And so I say for humans, for us to flourish in this world where we will, it's, you know, an inevitable reality in the modern era that we live in, we will experience stress. I think there's 3 things that we have to do. The first thing, we have to reduce the little micro stresses in our lives. You know, turning off notifications. I often say to people, bundle or batch your notifications rather than dribbling in and distracting you throughout your day. One of the reasons is that we have ancient Paleolithic brains. We have brains that are biologically designed to go and forage, hunt, and get information. But when we're constantly getting pings and dings coming to us, unsolicited pings and dings, and constantly, it tricks our brain into thinking they're urgent and important. So turning off notifications, closing our eyes where we can, doing the sighing, like just reducing the little things that stress us out. The second thing we have to do is we have to build our tolerance to stress. We have become accustomed as humans to very rarely today experiencing physical stress. We avoid it. We're hot, we flick on the air conditioner.
Which is what I just mentioned, right? You said about that part of the brain, which I think is incredible.
Yeah, we're cold, we flick on the heater. We're hungry, we order Uber Eats. We're living in an age of instant gratification. And so when we are ill-equipped to deal with physical stress, we're often ill-equipped to deal with psychological stress. So what can we do to develop our tolerance to stress? And this is why, I know many of your listeners probably would have heard of ice baths and cold showers and swimming in the ocean or the lake during winter months. There is solid science behind that. We know, for example, that a 30 to 60 second cold shower will give us between a 250 to 500% increase in dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. Wow. They're neurochemicals, I say, that do the 2 Fs. They make us feel good afterwards. The cold shower is never pleasurable. No, I have a lot of people saying it's awful. Yes, it is awful. Yeah. It helps you feel good, and it also puts you in an alert, focused state. It activates your hypothalamus. So
but it's hard, right?
It's hard.
So we're pushing our body to do something physically hard, and that's helping us become stronger.
Exactly. So we're developing that stress tolerance. We know vigorous physical activity, another really great way for us to challenge ourselves physically so that we are better equipped to deal with those psychological stresses. So that's the second thing, building that tolerance or capacity to hold stress. And the third one is, how do we become resilient? How do we respond, not react to stress? Is it doing the breathing? Is it closing your eyes? We know, being in close proximity, human connection, our brains make oxytocin, which is the social bonding hormone, when we're in close proximity with people. If we were having this conversation on Zoom, our bodies would not be making the oxytocin. We instead, even if we were having this identical conversation right now, our bodies would be producing cortisol. Wow. Because being online, our eyes converge. There's the lack, I only see the truncated postage stamp view of you. I don't get the body language and all the little hidden gestures. So how do we build our capacity to respond to stress? Is it, time in sunlight? Another really simple thing that we've forgotten to do is to go for a walk. When we walk, we create optic flow. So things move past our eyes. When things move past our eyes, it quietens down part of the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is our worry center. It's almost like the emotional thermostat of the brain. This is also why we often have great ideas when we go for a walk or we solve a complex problems, because those things move past our brain. Wow. So the good news is, as you said, there's unique regions of the brain. We can build up regions of the brain that mean we can be more adept at responding to stress. So the good news is that we can train our body to deal with more stress and to respond, not to react to stress.
And I love that part, because I think that for a lot of women, and I'm in that boat too, when you hear about people go, oh, stress, I'm like, well, I don't know how I'm going to ever get less stressed because my life's crazy. But I think that if we can learn, like you said, to build our resilience and deal with that stress, that's like the magic bullet, I guess, to go, how do we maintain that our health? Because obviously this prolonged chronic stress has diabolical consequences.
It does, and it is estimated that 70 to 90% of all GP visits are in some way stress related.
Wow.
Like, this is almost the foundational piece. If we want to thrive as humans, if we want to live this high-res life, then learning how to manage stress is almost like a super skill. And I also think if you have a caring role, if you're a parent, this is a skill we've got to cultivate in our young people. We know, mental health issues are rising with young people, and screens are often blamed. It's often not the direct cause, it's what our screen use is displacing. We're not moving as much as what we used to. We're far more sedentary. We're not getting as much sleep. And we know there is a very intricate relationship between sleep and stress. And we also know we're not getting as much human connection. Everything's text-based or screen-based. It's the displacement of those rudimentary human needs. So there are things that we can all put in place, I think, to learn to dance with stress in a better way.
Yeah, amazing. Well, this has been so fascinating. Thank you so much for coming on. And I think that just the best thing is that everyone listening to this can really have a positive impact on their own health and life by managing the stress and by building up resilience to actually cope with stresses, because it's going to happen.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you
It was
so
a pleasure.
much.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I love
Thank
it.
you. That
So
was easy.
good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I enjoyed that.
It's just so interesting, isn't it? And it's I like I said, when I did get the shingles, I just couldn't believe how there was. Oh, we need a photograph. Photo. There isn't any. There's no way to test if someone